and welcome to the Wormhole Podcast, episode 40. I'm Charlie Place, and joining me today is the British Fantasy Award for Best Newcomer and Hugo Award-winning writer of The Sorcerer to the Crown novels. However, she's here today to discuss her latest release, Blackwater Sister. Hello, Zen Cho.
Hello.
It's good to have you here. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Blackwater Sister sees Chinese-Malaysian-American Jess move to Penang with her parents, and they stay with family. Jess has started hearing the voice of her deceased maternal grandmother in her head. This is a woman she's never met. Arma needs Jess's help with an issue that involves ex-lovers and goddesses, and Jess will have to use her physical strength in order to help. It's a bit of an ask because she's got lots going on already that she has to deal with. In a nutshell, as Zen has said herself, this book is about gods, ghosts, gangsters and grandmas, which I think is absolutely brilliant. Zen, should we start with your reading from the beginning?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So this is the very first scene, and I'll just dive into it. The first thing the ghost said to Jess was, "Does your mother know you're a punkit?" The ghost said it to shock. Unfortunately, it failed to consider the possibility that Jess might not understand it. Jess understood most of the Hokkien spoken to her, but because it was only ever her parents doing the speaking, there were certain gaps in her vocabulary. Jess didn't take much notice of the ghost. She might have been more worried if she was less busy, but in a sense, she'd been hearing disapproving voices in her head all her life. Usually, it was her mom's imagined voice lecturing her in Hokkien, but the ghost didn't sound that different. Even so, the ghost's voice stuck with her. The line was still repeating itself in her head the next day, with the persistence of a half-heard advertising jingle. She was waiting with her mom for the guy from the moving company. Mom was going through the bags of junk Jess had marked for throwing away, examining each object, and setting some aside to keep. Jess had spent hours bagging up her stuff. This second go-over was totally unnecessary. But it was a stressful time for Mom, she reminded herself. It was a huge deal to be moving countries at her age, even if she and Dad called it going home. Back to Malaysia, they said, as though the past 19 years had been a temporary aberration instead of Jess's entire life. "We said we were going to cut down on our possessions," Jess said. "I know," said Mom, "but this hairband is so nice." She waved a sparkly pink hairband at Jess. "You don't want to wear Min?" "Dad gave me that when I was 10, said Jess. "My head's too big for it now." Mom laid the hairband down, grimacing, but she couldn't quite bring herself to put it back in the garbage bag. Her innate hoarding tendencies had been aggravated by their financial instability. It seemed almost to give her a physical pain to throw things away. "Maybe your cousin Chingy can wear," she murmured. "Chingy is older than me," said Jess. She could feel her voice getting sharp. Patience didn't come naturally to her. She needed to redirect the conversation. The line came back to her. "Does your mother know you're a..." "What?" "Mom," Jess said in English, "what does punkit mean?" Mom dropped the hairband and whipping around. "What? Where did you learn that word?" Startled by the success of her feint, Jess said, "I heard it somewhere. Didn't you say it?" Mom stiffened all along her back like an offended cat. "Mom doesn't use words like that," she said. "Whatever friend told you that word, you better not hang out with them so much. It's not nice to say." This struck Jess as hilarious. "None of my friends speak Hokkien, Mom." "It's a Malay word," said Mom. "I only know it's because my colleague told me last time. Hokkien, we don't say such things." "Hokkien doesn't have any swear words," said Jess skeptically. "It's not a swear word." Mom cut herself off, conscious she'd betrayed too much, but Jess pounced. "So what does punkit mean?" It took some badgering before Mom broke down and told her. Even then, she spoke in such vague, roundabout terms. You know, these people, they have a certain lifestyle, that it took a while before Jess got what she was driving at. "You mean like a lesbian?" said Jess. Mom's expression told her all she needed to know. After a moment, Jess laughed. "I was starting to think it was something really terrible." Mom was still in prim school mom mode. "Not nice. Please don't say such things in front of the relatives." "I don't know what you're worrying about," said Jess, bemused. "If they're anything like you, I'm not going to be saying anything in front of the relatives. They'll do all the saying." "Good," said Mom. "Better not say anything if you're going to use such words." The hairband lay forgotten on the floor. Jess swept it discreetly into the garbage bag. "Come on, focus," she said. "This is taking forever. Remember, they're coming at 4. "Ah, Mom is not efficient," said her mom, flustered. But this acknowledged, she went on at the same snail's pace as before, picking through each bag as though, with sufficient care, the detritus of Jess's childhood might be made to yield some extraordinary treasure. Whatever the treasure was, it wasn't just herself. Everything had boded well when she was a kid. Exemplary grades, AP classes, full ride to Ivy. But look at her now. 7 months out from college, she was unemployed and going nowhere fast. Everyone she'd known at college was either at some fancy grad school or in a lucrative big tech job. Meanwhile, Jess's parents had lost all their money, and here she was, their one insurance policy, their backup plan, still mooching off them. Ah, cried Mom. She sounded as though she'd discovered the Rosetta Stone. Remember this? Even when you're so small, you're so clever to draw. The drawing must have been bundled up with other, less interesting papers, or Jess wouldn't have thrown it away. Mom had kept every piece of art Jess had ever made, her childhood scrawls, treated with as much reverence as the pieces from her first and last photography exhibition in her junior year. The paper was thin, yellow and curly with age. Jess smelled crayon wax as she brought the drawing up to her face and was hit with an intense shot of nostalgia. A spindly person stood outside a house, her head roughly level with the roof. Next to her was a smaller figure, its face etched with parallel lines of black tears. They were colored orange because as a child, Jess had struggled to find any crayons that were a precise match for Chinese people's skin. Both figures had their arms raised. In the sky, at the upper left-hand corner of the drawing, was the plane at which they were waving, flying away. Jess didn't remember drawing the picture, but she knew what it was about. How old was I? 4 years old, said Mom. Her eyes were misty with reminiscence. The time Daddy still couldn't get a job in America. Luckily, his friend asked Daddy to help out with his company in Kuala Lumpur, but Daddy had to fly back and forth between here and KL. Each time went back for 2-3 months. Your kindergarten teacher asked me, is Jasmine's father overseas? Then she showed me this. I thought, Alama, cannot like this. Min will get a complex. I almost brought you back to Malaysia. Forget America, never mind our green cards. It's more important for the family to be together. Jess touched the drawing, following the teardrops on the child's face. When was the last time she'd cried? Not when she'd said goodbye to Sharanya, neither of them knowing when they'd see each other again. She'd told a dumb joke and made Sharanya laugh and call her an asshole, tears in her eyes. Jess must have cried during Dad's cancer scare, but she couldn't remember doing it. Only the tearless hours in waiting rooms, stale with exhaustion, Jess staring over Mom's head as she wept. Why didn't we go back, said Jess. In the end, Daddy got a job, what, said Mom. He was going back and forth for a short time only. It's not like you were an abandoned child. I was here. You turned out okay. The words sounded like an appeal for reassurance, but the tone was strangely perfunctory, as though she was rehearsing a defense she'd repeated many times before. You turned out okay, Mom said again. She took the picture from Jess, smoothing it out and putting it on the pile of things to keep. Yeah, said Jess. She wasn't sure whom they were trying to convince.
That was fantastic. Thank you. I'm really glad we did that.
Thank you.
So we'll get onto the themes in a moment because they are important. But first, I want to say it might have been apparent from the reading there. Zen, this book is just fantastically funny. It's constantly on point. Was it always going to be comedic?
I think so. That just seems to be inherent to my worldview and my style. Yeah. So I guess it was always going to be funny.
And what was the decision to have Jess be American rather than British? You live in Britain yourself.
Well, I actually thought quite a lot about that. The picture in that scene was a picture I drew because my family did what Jess did actually when I was very young, sort of around 5 or 6 years old. We had a kind of trial move to America. We all won green cards. My mom tells a really funny story about this, actually. She was like, there's an ad in the paper for the green card lottery, and your dad always wins things in the newspaper. So, as though it was like a rice cooker or something, or, a free toaster. So we all applied. We went for an interview. We all got green cards and off we went. And it just didn't really work out. My dad kind of struggled to get a job, and there was an opportunity back home in Malaysia. And so he went back and started working there. And we eventually decided to move back as a family. And I think actually did better financially out of that probably than if we had stayed in America. So that scene was kind of drawn directly from personal experience in that sense. And so I guess that's why they ended up being American. I mean, the other big reason for it, because I did think about having just be British and return to Malaysia from Britain. But the other big reason is that they basically go back to Malaysia because they just had a massive reversal in their fortune. So just his dad lost his job and then he got sick, he got cancer, and basically they are in debt. Their finances have been devastated. And although obviously losing your job and getting cancer in the UK would be pretty bad, I don't think it'd be quite as catastrophic given the NHS.
That's true, yes. It is interesting. I mean, in my review, I have noted that it kind of reminds me a bit of the BBC's Ghosts, that you've got just so much British humour in there. It's interesting to hear your answer there and see the inspiration from your own life. Can you tell us about what research you did and what inspired the book in terms of Blackwater Sister herself?
Yeah, so the Blackwater Sister is a goddess who is worshipped by Jess's grandmother. Well, was worshipped by her in life and becomes an important character in the book. So there are kind of two strands to that element of the book. I grew up as a kind of Buddhist Taoist, so very similar kind of religious background that Jess and her parents have. And although my parents weren't super religious, that was kind of the texture of our lives, I guess. There's a line in the book that says something like, just as parents leave the gods alone in the hope the gods will do them the same favor. And that's definitely the attitude my parents had when I was growing up. And so we kind of go to the temple and do all these things, and they never really explain anything because everything was really taboo and you didn't want to offend anyone. By anyone, I mean spirits and gods. So I never really understood what was going on. And then what happened was, after I was an adult, I came across a book called The Way That Lives in the Heart. And it's written by a Canadian anthropologist who went to Penang in the 1980s and did field work amongst the Chinese community there. And particularly, she studied the practice of Chinese popular religion and spirit mediumship. And then she wrote this book about it. And so it was just really interesting and just kind of explained all this stuff that I'd grown up around but never really understood. And I guess essentially it provided a kind of intellectual framework for understanding these beliefs and experiences I'd been brought up around. And so when I read it, I knew that I was going to write a novel about it. And that turned out to be Blackwater Sister.
That's fascinating. So you've kind of sort of had a character development yourself through writing this book.
I guess so, yeah. I should say Blackwater Sister is an invented god. She's not real, but she's inspired by a real life practices. So one way that gods come into being in this sort of popular practice is if someone has a violent death. And I think basically what seems to happen is that someone might have kind of a bad death, like be murdered or drown at sea. And then you might worry a bit that they will come and haunt you. So you might start praying to them to kind of appease their ghost. And over time, a cult might develop if it feels like the praying is effective.
She is an interesting ghost because, of course, my Western viewpoint, I suppose, but coming to the book and seeing about the ghosts and you're thinking, they might be more the kind of creator ghosts. And then you've got this person who was a human. But you mentioned there about how you created Blackwater Sister herself. People might wonder, are there any gods in the book that are real to the folklore and religion?
Yeah. So there are a few that are real. There are some gods that will be found basically almost anywhere Chinese people are to be found. Guan Gong, who was a general from Chinese history and was deified. He's the god of a lot of things. You see him kind of in restaurants, businesses, enjoy his patronage. I think he's also the patron god of the police, but also triads, which is interesting. Triads being, gangsters. There's also the monkey king, the monkey god, Sun Wukong, who might be familiar to British listeners from, I think there was a series called Monkey, wasn't there, that people watched here. So he's a character from Journey to the West, one of the 4 great Chinese classics. And he travels from China to India to get some sutras from India, and he eventually becomes a Buddha. He's a bit of a kind of trickster figure, I guess, almost. His life story is mostly him making trouble, but then he kind of learns virtue in the end. And so he appears, and the worship of him appears in the book as well. And then the third god, who's my favorite, is the Datuk Gong or Natukong in Chinese. And there's a Datuk Gong in the book, and he's a small god. So there are lots of different Datuk Gongs, and they're kind of local spirits, guardian spirits, I guess, of their locality. And you'll see this sort of small red shrine for Datuk Gong sort of scattered everywhere, really, in urban Malaysia, particularly construction sites, car parks. You see them quite a lot. There's sort of different personalities that can be a Datuk Gong, but sometimes it's human beings who've been deified afterwards. Or it can be, like the spirit of a particularly magical rock or tree or something, stuff like that. And yeah, so he appears in the book. What's interesting about the Datuk Gong actually is, although he is worshipped by the Chinese community largely, Datuk Gong themselves are Malay because Malaysia is predominantly Malay Muslim. And so it's kind of quote unquote the Malays land on one view. And so, for example, if you've got a construction site and you're building a building, you want to kind of get the approval of the local spirit. So you'll have a Datuk Gong shrine and you'll kind of pray to him as a Chinese person. But because he himself is Muslim, you'll only give halal offerings. So you won't give him any pork or anything like that. That would be offensive. You'll sort of give him things that you think Malay people like to eat, basically.
You've made me remember the bit where Datuk Kong, is that how you say it?
Datuk Kong, yeah.
Datuk Kong asks for the modern day, almost, it sounds like in the book, takeaway food, which was absolutely hilarious. I love that. But you say about the Monkey King, that was a really interesting part of the book. I don't want to say too much because I know it's quite far in, where you have this kind of, like, it seems violent to Jess happening. I mean, in general, the book, I suppose you could call it a low fantasy. You know, there's a lot of reality in it, and then you've got the kind of in between magical realism and full-on fantasy. Did you ever consider going further with the gods and the ghosts and that sort of theme and taking it further fantastical-wise?
It's an interesting question, and the answer is no. And the reason for that is because on one view, and I've said this a few times in different interviews actually, you could argue it's not a fantasy at all. It's being sold as a fantasy, but the kind of point with these practices that are being depicted, the kind of religious beliefs, is that they are real life religious practices, and the gods that are depicted, apart from the one I invented, are gods that people believe in. So in a way, it's not really fantasy. It is fantasy in that, you know, I fictionalize the encounters with the gods, and they're a bit more dramatic than they would be in real life and so on. But in modern day Malaysia, you can absolutely go to a temple and see a spirit medium get possessed by the monkey god and then ask him some questions about what you should be doing with your life and what's going on with you. And that was something I find really interesting and that I really wanted to depict fairly faithfully. So as I said, although I do dramatize things and I do fictionalize them, and it is more exciting than it would be in real life, I did quite strongly want to keep it feeling real.
Well, out of interest then, what would you describe the book as yourself?
I didn't really think about this when I was writing the book. I think I would say it's a family drama with, gods and ghosts. So whether you want to call that a fantasy or a ghost story, magical realism, I mean, I'm pretty relaxed.
Now, you say a lot of things. I mean, I come from a Christian background myself, so there was a lot in there that I could kind of relate to. One more question about the religious aspect. You have a bit of a smashing up of a shrine, which is striking because, of course, it's obviously sort of disrespectful. I was quite shocked. I was like, my goodness, what's happening here? Was that difficult to include?
Oh, no, not particularly. If you asked me to smash up a shrine, I'd hesitate for sure. I wouldn't want to do it. But no, in the story, it was what the character needed to do. And she actually has some supernatural strength at the time. So hopefully that gets over the plausibility or lack thereof of being able to smash up a shrine that's made of wood and stuff that easily. But yeah, that wasn't that hard to write, no.
So I'll move away. How much are the characters, perhaps if we say Jess, Armar and Blackwater Sister, the characters other than them, how much are those other characters a way or a device to keep Jess's development going?
That's an interesting question. I mean, in a way, the entire story is a way to keep Jess's development going. It's very much a story that's very focused on her personal journey from the starting point to the end point. Because as people will have heard when I was reading from the story, it starts with a ghost asking her, does your mother know you're gay, essentially. The story has to bring her to the point where she can give the answer to that question that is right for her. But stepping back from that, I think all the characters, I tried to write them as though they were people that you might meet. And in fact, several of them were inspired by people I know or people I'd heard of. And I think my goal was that even if you only see a little bit of them, they feel like people you might actually speak to and encounter.
Well, you've said about the start of the book. You start and end on Jess's sexuality. Why was it important to do that?
It was just how the story came to me. That was, well, I talked a bit about one source of inspiration for the story, that book, The Way That Lived in the Heart, and wanting to kind of explore these spiritual and religious practices. The other source of inspiration actually was the word hag-ridden. So my first two novels were historical fantasies. I wrote them by having lots of reference to the online Oxford English Dictionary and kind of diving through the thesaurus particularly and finding all these great archaic words. And one of these words that I came across in the course of that was the word hag-ridden. So hag as in witch, and then ridden as in ridden around. And it basically means stressed. But and I think it came from this idea of being ridden by a witch, maybe cursed by a witch. And it just gave me this idea of a story of a young woman who was being ridden around by the ghost of a terrible ancestor. And so the working title for the book was Hag-ridden, actually, although we changed it because it felt it was too horror. And I guess Hag-ridden is a slightly unfamiliar word as well, so it might be difficult for people to remember, whatever. That combination of those two things was what gave rise to the book. And then when I was planning it, the opening just came to me and I wrote it down and it's never changed. So I guess that was the kind of third element that made the book up. Family is kind of one of my repeated themes. I'm very interested in family as the kind of site of one's development and also kind of the strongest bonds that you can have in your life. And I think there's something kind of interesting about family, because even if you don't have a good relationship or you cut off ties with your parents, for example, or your family, there's a sense in which your mom is always going to be your mom, no matter what. Neither of you can really do anything about that. And I think that kind of inextricability of that tie really fascinates me. So I'm also really interested in kind of the limits of family love, the ways in which families treat each other badly. And I think one of the kind of places where I often see that kind of conflict between what a family maybe should be and then what it often unfortunately is when there's queerness involved. So Jess is a lesbian and she's hiding that from her parents. And she's very close to her parents. Hopefully it's clear to readers that there's a really strong bond there, really strong love on both sides. But this is kind of a big thing about her that she knows is going to be really difficult for her parents to accept. Yeah, so that was just something I was interested in exploring.
Mm-hmm. Well, I did love how you had so many members of the family. Talking of family, but it was never difficult to keep track of the characters. They were just so different and they gave you such a well-rounded feel for everything in the family itself, obviously, but also to do with what Jess was dealing with and who she was dealing with and why she made the decisions she did. I'm going to go back to Jess and Armagh and the Blackwater sister briefly. How much are those three women the same person?
Yeah, again, another interesting question. So Jess and Armagh and Blackwater sister were always distinct kind of people to me when I started writing. Or rather, Jess and Armagh definitely were very distinct to me. I talked about this idea coming from the word hag-ridden. I mean, they were obviously pretty clear to me from the beginning. And then Blackwater sister kind of emerged in the course of writing as increasingly the center of the book in a way. So I never kind of set out thinking, oh, I'll write like this kind of trio of women and they'll all reflect each other. But of course, that's kind of what happened. I think one thing that they exemplify, this kind of triangle of three women, is one of the themes of the book, which is who you are depends on when you are. And where you are. And that's something that's very true for Jess, who's born in Malaysia but grew up in America. Now she's back in Malaysia and she's kind of in between, But it's also true for example, her position is expressly contrasted with that of Armagh and Blackwater sister. So Armagh was illiterate. She, was poor. In her life, she worked as a rubber tapper. And she had a husband who wasn't very nice to her. She didn't have a huge amount of family support. And so she's a fighter and she's not very nice, but you can see how her life has shaped her. And then Blackwater sister is, again, a kind of an image of that. She's a goddess, but before she became a god, she was a human being who died of violent death. And her life, again, was not an easy life. And it was specifically not an easy life because she was a woman in a fairly patriarchal society. And so Jess, with all her life problems, she has masses of privilege, being educated, English speaking, having a family who think it's important that she is happy as well as safe, as well as compliant. So that, I guess, having those three characters, that was kind of a way of thinking about that.
I just loved how they all came into their own at the same time. I thought that was absolutely stunning.
Thank you.
There is a lot of, I think you'd call it Manglish. Is that how Manglish phrasing. And it tends to come without translations, which is obviously the natural way of speaking, but it's quite different in the English literary context where things are often put twice, once in the language and once in English. Was it always the plan to have it this way without the translations?
Yes, that's how I write. Yeah. I mean, I think I hopefully do a decent job of making it either clear from context what any unfamiliar words mean, or make it unnecessary for the reader to understand every single word in order to kind of understand the general thrust of the scene. But I grew up in Malaysia reading all these books from Britain and America. My family spoke English at home, but it was Malaysian English or Manglish. And Jane Austen, for example, doesn't explain kind of Regency cultural norms to you as she takes you through her books. You just learn them from reading them. And definitely for me, that was just so much of the pleasure of the books, was visiting a different mindset, a different world, immersing myself in it and not being kind of handheld through it. So I just think there's no reason not to take that approach as a writer, even if you're kind of from a non-Western background and know most of your readers, or many of your readers, will be Westerners.
Yeah, you said it, and you definitely do pick it up as you go along, which is nice, because then of course you start learning a bit of it as well, and you can apply it next time as well. Speaking as someone who doesn't speak the language. Necessary Detour, favourite Jane Austen novel?
Oh, that's such a hard one. I think my answer is going to be, well, really cliche, and it's Pride and Prejudice, because I do think in many ways it's such a perfect book. But I've always had kind of a lurking fondness for Mansfield Park. A lot of people don't like it because Fanny Price is a bit wet, but I just really love it. It's something about it's kind of, I don't know, I just find something new in it every time.
Detour over, if we go back to the well-trodden path, with Sharanya never being physically present, we get this element of distance, which is obviously literal, but it's also kind of metaphorical, which was really interesting in itself. But did you ever consider having her there in person?
Yeah, Sharanya is Jess's long distance girlfriend. So I did briefly consider having her there in person, but I just felt there was kind of a lot going on as it was. I didn't really feel that the book had space for an in-person girlfriend. And actually, this is kind of a sneak peek behind the scenes kind of thing. But in the first draft of the novel, Jess has broken up with Sharanya at the beginning of the book. So Sharanya is kind of present in her life in the sense that, like, when you've broken up with a long-term partner and you didn't want to break up with them and it all kind of went wrong and is still hanging over you. But she wasn't present as a character at all, except at the very end where she kind of reappears. So it was in the course of edits, when I was editing it, I was told, why don't you bring Sharanya on stage? And I thought, yeah, why don't we bring Sharanya on stage? Why don't we show readers, I guess, what Jess is missing out in being closeted from her family and being afraid, I guess, to kind of step into that life. So that's kind of where I ended up, where they're having a long distance relationship.
That's interesting. So something different. You've got Sherng, the cafe owner. Is his life going to be more above board, I suppose, than things have happened already? I think I can say this without spoilers, because you find out at the very beginning of the book that Sherng is the son of a gangster. He's a business magnate. Sorry, the father of Sherng is a business magnate who used to be a gangster and is still pretty gangstery in his ways. But Sherng is kind of clean of that stuff. He's just a rich man's son, basically. He runs this chain of hipster cafes. He went to a couple of big universities. He went to international school, and he loves heritage buildings, and he wants to save the Blackwater Sisters Temple. So I think Sherng's an interesting one, because he's someone who just, he kind of wants to be a good person, but I guess he doesn't really know how to be. And he also maybe is a bit lazy to try hard enough. And in a way, he's so wrapped around with privilege that it's quite difficult for him, I think, to be a good person. Well, I was talking about Sherng on another interview, and I sort of said jokingly that he's a bit of a call out of my generation, I think. But maybe he's an expression both of discomfort with socioeconomic privilege, particularly in a country like Malaysia, where I think inequality and discrimination are just so clearly marked. I'm thinking about this a bit today, for example, because the official Department of Immigration in Malaysia, their Twitter account posted, this extraordinary graphic, a bit like a movie poster showing all these kind of soldiers or whatnot, saying, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, so apologies, but Rohingya migrants are not welcome in Malaysia. What they're saying is that we'll hunt you down basically if you come, which I just think is absolutely
appalling, completely unacceptable, and particularly hypocritical in a country like Malaysia, which just bangs on about what a great kind of moderate Muslim country it is. Every time there's a kind of issue with Palestine, out all the usual commentators come saying how terrible it is, etc., shouting against Israel and America. And then when there's next door in Burma and Myanmar an ongoing human rights crises with a Muslim community, it's like F off basically. So I the whole thing, anyway, sorry, this is a rant, this is a real digression. What I'm trying to say is that I guess Sherng is a bit of an expression of that kind of idea that you can be very kind of presentable and you might want to be progressive, but actually if you're from a society like that and you haven't been able to change that society, what kind of good are you really? It's a call out.
No, it's good to ask the question, because I know reading it, I wasn't always sure how I should be reading him, and I suppose that was probably deliberate on your part. Is he okay? Is he not? And the dad, and what's going on here, But I know that I definitely ended the book with a really strong picture of the land that's disputed, let's say, in my head. And, you've written it beautifully and it sounds wonderful. And I kind of really want to see what happens with that. And at the same time, I really don't.
I see, yeah. Yeah, so the disputed area is a garden temple, the temple of the Blackwater Sister, which is described as being very picturesque. And it's an interesting one because actually I drew direct inspiration for that from the book, The Way That Lives in the Heart, which talks about a shrine grotto in Penang, which has some similarities, so shrines embedded in trees and that kind of thing. And there's some amazing pictures. But, this shrine was destroyed by development sometime, I think, in the 90s. And I haven't been able to actually find any pictures online or any really evidence that it ever existed. So, yeah, it's interesting kind of resurrecting it for my book.
Mm-hmm. So you kept it alive in its way.
In a way.
Yeah, I like it. So, obviously, this book, it is completely new and everyone go out and buy it. But I do feel the need to end on this question. Zen, what's next?
People always ask that. Why do they always ask that? So I wish I could answer, but what I did after turning this in, and I turned it in last autumn, I'm not out of contract. And I just thought, well, I've got a job, I've got a small child, there's a global pandemic going on. I'm just gonna mess around for a while. So I've just been messing around, to be honest, creatively. I am working on a kind of a soul bond romance novella, which is a lot of fun, very different from Blackwater Sister, but maybe it's got some commonalities as well. And it's set in a kind of a fictional Southeast Asian country, and it deals with some of the, I guess, growing pains of a developing country that you see in Blackwater Sister. So maybe that's the connection. But yeah, so I don't know when that's going to be finished or when it's going to be published or anything like that, but I'm having fun with it.
Ah, no, sounds cool. Well, if it comes out, it comes out and we'll read it. If not, I mean, it sounds like you've got notebooks worth of info if you wanted to publish a notebook or something, or a blog post there. You've got loads of blog posts.
I should actually mention, I should start mentioning this, but actually I've got my first book, which was a short story collection called Spirits Abroad, is being re-released in August by Small Beer Press, which is a small press based in the US. And I'm really excited about that because it was initially published by a Malaysian publisher who's fantastic, but only distributed really in Malaysia. So really excited about getting Spirits Abroad more accessible to Western readers. It'll be available in ebook as well. And if you liked Blackwater Sister, it's a good one to pick up because it's also lots of contemporary fantasy set in modern Malaysia about young women dealing with noxious family members. So kind of my eternal themes.
Well, you sold it to me. Listeners, hopefully it sold it to you. Listeners, links to purchase Blackwater Sister are in the episode description. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider reviewing the show. You can do this on Apple Podcasts, Podcast Addict site, or Podchaser website. I'll include links. Do review any other podcasts you listen to. The feedback is really useful to creators. Zen, thank you very much for being here today. I've really enjoyed particularly the discussion on religion. That's been so fascinating. And hearing everything that went into this book, because there is so much. It seems so simple on the surface, but there's just so much going on. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Really enjoyed the discussion.
Join me on Monday the 12th of July, when I will be talking to Rosanna Lay, author of The Orange Grove. The Wormhole Podcast, episode 40, was recorded on the 11th of June and published on the 28th of June, 2021. Music and production by Charlie Place.